Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, January 7th, and we will be discussing Marathon Man. Rabbi, take it away.
Okay, great. So yeah, Marathon Man made in 1976. Um, and it's set in 1976 as well,
Mhm.
and it reflects a moment in American history that I think is worth revisiting today, and also reflects the city of New York in 1976 in
Mhm.
very powerful ways. It's a historic document in that sense. The way some of the other films we've watched over the years do that as well. They give us an insight into a particular time and place when the movie was made. So we have to think about that for a minute about what life in America was like in 1976. Right? So this is actually a year before Dustin Hoffman stars in All the President's Men, right? So you need to think about that sort of time frame post Watergate, the Watergate trials, the kind of national disillusionment, I think, that people felt after Watergate, right? And also that our eyes had been opened in a sense that perhaps they hadn't before, about what the inner workings of government really looked like, right?
Mhm.
So that's part of it. Should also remember that New York City filed for bankruptcy in 1975. So
Mm.
the year before this movie came out. So public services were as part of that bankruptcy. Garbage pickup and things like that. A lot of things, um, uh, fell by the wayside for a while in New York. So we have a city on edge in a way, and a world on edge in 1976. I think that's worth thinking about. It's also something we don't think about much. We're apt to think about whatever moment we're living in is like the worst moment ever, but there were thousands of bombings in the United States in the early to mid 70s, right? The um, various different political factions engaged in bombings. So there were something like 2,000 bombings in the United States per year in the early 1970s. And that was also true in Europe. So a lot of different factions involved. And so we see some aspects of that in the movie, right? So we have to put ourselves into that time frame for a moment when we talk about Marathon Man. So let's talk about the people who made it to begin with. The director, John Schlesinger, was actually born in London in a Jewish family. So, and he came to America after getting his start in the film business in England. So his first couple of movies are all made in England. A Kind of Loving is his first movie, which actually takes on questions about homosexuality, as I recall, in the early 1960s. Then he made Billy Liar. He was nominated for his first Oscar for a movie called Darling with Julie Christie.
Mhm.
Then he made Far from the Madding Crowd and came to America and made Midnight Cowboy. So,
Oh,
Mm.
also said in New York City, to this day, still the only X-rated movie to ever win the Oscar for Best Picture. Um, and he won the Oscar that year for Best Director. It was also the first time he worked with Dustin Hoffman, who he works with here as well 6 years later, right? Dustin Hoffman was nominated for the Oscar for the role of Ratso Rizzo in Midnight Cowboy. And, um, and he also made the movie Sunday Bloody Sunday, which was also an Oscar-nominated film for him. So John Schlesinger, quite a career, actually. Other movies you may have seen, I like his movie Day of the Locust with uh, um, Donald Sutherland, among others. But so he had a really good career, and Marathon Man was very well liked and respected, got good reviews at the time, and received some Oscar nominations as well, right? So, so the screenplay is from a novel, and the writer of the screenplay is also the novelist William Goldman. I think somebody, I don't know if it's anybody on this call, remembers William Goldman from childhood because he was born and grew up in Highland Park, Illinois.
Mm.
Oh, I seem to remember because way back in our series of Jewish film classics, we watched the movie No Way to Treat a Lady from the 1960s, um, with um, George Siegel in it, right? And William Goldman was the screenplay writer, was one of his early credits was No Way to Treat a Lady, right? But he also wrote the book and the screenplay for The Princess Bride, um, and as well as writing screenplays for movies like Misery, based on Stephen King's book, Papillon, The Stepford Wives, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and a year after making Marathon Man with John Schlesinger and Dustin Hoffman, he wrote the screenplay for All the President's Men, which won an Oscar for Best Screenplay, as did his screenplay for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
It
So,
looks like he died in 2018.
yes, yeah. Born in 1931, died 2018. Yeah. So, but he was born right here, went to Highland Park High School. So I seem to remember, I guess it's nobody on this call, that someone, when we were talking about No Way to Treat a Lady, which was all the way back in really in COVID times, I think it was in one of the early series that we did, um, someone went to high school with him. So anyhow, um, two real outstanding crafts people, I'd say. Great screenplay writer, William Goldman, great director, John Schlesinger. Yeah. We get to
Oh,
the cast, and the cast's not too shabby either here. We've got
Mhm.
some pretty well-known actors. It's also Laurence Olivier playing the bad guy, and again, one of the reasons we watched this movie in tandem with what we watched the last time was to see um, uh, Olivier go from being the Nazi hunter in the movie we watched last time to being the Nazi this time around, right? So, um, and got Oscar nominations for Best Supporting Actor for both of these movies, right? Playing the loose characterization of Simon Wiesenthal in in one movie to playing a loose characterization of a character somewhat like Joseph Mengele, the bad guy of the last movie, in this movie. So, um, personally, if I have to pick a performance, I would pick this one.
I agree.
Yes, feels much more um, real and natural, and the and that may have something to do with the screenplay writer and the director, right? The screenplay writer here maybe gave some specificity to the character that doesn't really appear in his performance of Mengele. I'm thinking in particular, the scene that everybody remembers from this movie, right, is the scene where he tortures Dustin Hoffman.
Mhm.
But the specificity of that characterization, where he uh, washes his hands and puts on gloves before he does it, is like a normal dentist would do, before examining a patient. It's a striking piece of characterization, I guess I would say that, um, and all the more sinister because it's normal, right? So uh, this is, um, my father was a dentist, so I don't have the fear of dentists that a lot of people have, but this movie played into a lot of people's primal
Mhm.
I think. And Olivier plays it chillingly. Um, it's not unlike Anthony Hopkins' performance as Hannibal Lecter, you know, several years later, right? Not that many years later, actually, but the coldness of it is very striking and quite remarkable. So, um, I don't have to tell you about all of Olivier's accolades. I talked about him a couple of weeks ago too when we watched the last one. But of course, um, a it goes well beyond just respect, a revered actor of through the generations, and actor and director and producer, and uh, remarkable career. So um, if you want to see him in a different kind of role, I think I recommended The Entertainer, British film from, I want to say, the late 1950s, that is really a very different kind of performance, but quite lovely. So, so he plays Dr. Christian Zell in this movie, and then two other actors. Roy Scheider plays Doc Levy, the older brother of these two brothers, the Levy brothers, in this movie. Roy Scheider, not Jewish, been in a number of movies and played Jewish characters here and there, including here. Now, I want to point out that the movie isn't particularly explicit about the Jewishness of these characters, right? You could watch this movie and not realize, suppose that these two guys are Jewish, but the fact that their last name is Levy, the historical circumstance and sense of having a father who was an academic who was pursued by McCarthy, these are sort of Jewish touchstones in American drama, and for me, I like the fact that you can have a movie with Jewish characters where their Jewishness is not the important thing here, right? In fact, in his work for the organization, Doc Levy has been a courier for a Nazi, right? So it's just an interesting, when we talk about movies with Jewish text and Jewish characters, we're looking for it's trying to walk this line of, can't we just be Jewish in the movie like we are Jewish in life, right? We do our work, whatever it is, we live in a society and these kinds of things. And the Jewishness of the characters is in their bones, but it's not necessarily in the screenplay. Right. So I think that that's a powerful statement about Jews in movies in this case. Right? So um, Roy Scheider was nominated for the Oscar a couple of times. He didn't win, but he was nominated for All That Jazz and for his role in The French Connection. And I think he was nominated for Jaws as well. So um, so again, a decorated film career. Um, he rarely was the leading man. Um, so in this movie, he's a supporting actor, as he is in Jaws and French Connection. He's the leading man in All That Jazz, and in a movie called The Seven Ups, which is a good crime thriller as well from the 1970s. So. Um, he was born in 1932, died in 2008. Dustin Hoffman, of course, is still with us, which is great. He's just this last year, he was in Francis Ford Coppola's movie Megalopolis. So he's still around, still active, still acting. He's been nominated. He's been nominated for 7 Oscars, and I think he's won 2. And the way I already mentioned, Midnight Cowboy in 1970. Even before that, his breakthrough role, not exactly his debut, but close, was The Graduate in 1968, and he was nominated for an Oscar for that as well. We're going to watch Lenny the next time, and he's nominated for playing Lenny Bruce. in 1975, so the year before this movie came out. So, and then 4 years later, he won the Oscar for Kramer versus Kramer in 1980. Um, he was nominated for Tootsie in 1983. He won again in 1989 for Rain Man, and his I think his most recent Oscar nomination goes back a ways, was Wag the Dog for Best
Oh,
Supporting Actor in 1998. So
huh.
so he plays Babe Levy in this movie. I don't think anybody uses his real name. It's in the credits on IMDb as Thomas, but I don't think I heard anybody call him anything but Babe in this movie. So, but so he's the younger of the Levy brothers, and Dustin Hoffman, young enough at this time to portray a PhD candidate. So not that many years after he played a college graduate in The Graduate. Um, in smaller roles, we had um, Marta Keller, who also is still around and active, born in 1945. Um, she plays Elsa, of course, in this movie. I think she was just in a movie called One Life about, I think it's uh, about someone who saved Jews during the Holocaust from 2023. So I think that's the most recent thing I've seen. She was involved with Al Pacino. You see her in the pictures there. They met working on a movie called Bobby Deerfield back in the 70s. And uh, she plays a terrorist in the movie about um, bombing the Super Bowl, called Black Sunday, um, which was made in Miami, Florida, around the Orange Bowl when I was growing up, and so I'm actually in a couple of crowd scenes as an extra in Black Sunday. So I did not meet Marta Keller though, but you know. I went to see the movie just to see the Orange Bowl and see, they had thousands of us in the Orange Bowl, and they just said, run this way, and now run that way, and stuff like that. So you can't pick me out in the crowd, I'm sure. Um, but at any rate, she's been, a serious actress who hasn't gotten enough great roles, but she's, I think, pretty effective in this one. Fritz Weaver shows up for one scene as Professor Biesenthal. I think that the connection to the sound of the name Wiesenthal is not an accident, but the character is not a Nazi hunter. So but a PhD professor who who takes Babe on as a student and knows his father, right? And so it gives us some of the background of the Levy family in that one scene in the classroom there. Um, he got his start in the movie Failsafe with one of our Jewish film director Hall of Fame members, Sidney Lumet. We've seen, I think, more Sidney Lumet films than anybody else in this series. So, but he had his debut in Failsafe, right? So in the early 60s. Um, but he may look most familiar to you for his role as the head of the Jewish family in the TV miniseries Holocaust. He plays Dr. Weiss, and won an Emmy, or got an Emmy nomination, I think, for that back in the, I want to say, 70s, right? So he died in 2016, I think. So. And last, I'll mention William Devane, who plays the character of Janeway in this movie, and his face probably looks familiar if you don't really remember where. You know, he was part of the cast of Knots Landing for many years, which is probably his most lucrative role over the years. but he may be best remembered for having a Boston accent and portraying John Kennedy in the um, uh, what was that called? The Missiles of October, about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's
So,
all I can think of when I see him.
right, yeah, I mean, it was just, and I think he played Kennedy in more than one movie, and I think he played more than one Kennedy over the years as a result of that first performance, I think. But he's a pretty credible bad guy, I think, in this movie too.
He's a
So
great bad guy.
yeah, yeah. So. Um, so those are the folks who made it. Um, I'd just like to say word about the title and the meaning of it, I think, because that's really probably why I included it in this series, I think. I mean, I do like the performances. I do think it's a well constructed thriller all the way through, but that wouldn't be enough reason, I think, to put it there. But I think that this idea of this metaphor, let's say, of running a marathon is a metaphor for Jews in history, right? That this is what's going on. That we are there's when he meets what is her name? Opal? Elsa Opal in the library and follows her to back to her apartment. A relatively cute humorous scene in the midst of this thriller, right? How they meet, and he tells her that he sprained his ankle, and this is that you're not walking with a limp, and he says, I've trained myself not to feel the pain, right?
Mm.
I think that first of all, of course, foreshadows, he's going to do a lot of things in a lot of pain later in this movie. um, but beside that, I think it's a statement about Jews in history, right? And after the Holocaust, even going back, of course, much farther in Jewish history than that, persisting through the pain, continuing. The marathon is not a sprint, right? It's a long run. So the survival of the Jewish people is a kind of a marathon in and of itself. So I think that metaphor is what strikes me about this film in particular, and why I wanted to include it in this presentation, in this group of films. So so I think in that sense, we watched the movie last time, right? Mostly because of the characterization of the Jewish Nazi hunters in it, but I don't think it's as rich a metaphor as this one, right? Um, and I think the way the movie begins and some of the closing scenes, right, where we actually see older Jews, survivors, uh,
Mhm.
and their way of being in the world. I think I think it's kind of fascinating to begin with, but I also think it's um, they're folks who are running the race, right? They're running the marathon, and so I think that's a powerful framing device in the movie. How it begins with this chance confrontation, essentially, and near the end, the climaxes with another chance confrontation sense. So, in New York, on the edge, right? Uh, so I think the structure of the film is really elegant, actually, and very thoughtful. So I want to make a case for that. And then I'm curious. I know not everybody liked this one. I heard from a couple of people who vociferously didn't like it. So I wanted to make a little bit of a case for it. But I'm curious to hear thoughts from you guys. And what did you see? No.
Brenda?
Okay, well, there was a lot of violence,
Yeah.
and but after reading about it, it was actually they actually took some scenes out because when they first filmed it in California, people were complaining. In particular, the scene where Zabel plays, the dentist. There was a lot more to that in the original script than after it was slightly
Okay.
rewritten and toned down a little bit.
Yeah. I would say, uh, directors are always trying to figure out how far they want to push the envelope,
Hmm.
with,
Right.
with censors, and with public perception, right? That Schlesinger, obviously, he didn't shy away from much. Having in people thought that have getting an X rating on the movie Midnight Cowboy was the end of that movie. That would never be popular, would never amount to anything. So and the fact that his early movies deal with um, in with things that were sort of taboo subjects in even more so maybe in British film than in American film. Um, unwed mothers, homosexuality, and things like they were staples of Schlesinger's work. So
Hmm.
so he was always willing to push the envelope maybe a little farther than some other directors. But it's also that over the years, directors have often, um, with an eye towards what the censors were going to take out, they film things that they know are going to be taken out in order to get some other things passed, right?
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
I remember reading about this years ago among the writers of the TV series, in completely different vein, but remember the TV series Laugh-In, right? That the writers of Laugh-In routinely wrote jokes that they knew the censors would take out, which allowed them to sort of uh, say, "Okay, you can have that one. Can we have this one?" Right?
Hmm.
And so push the envelope in unexpected ways in those days. Uh, so so it doesn't surprise me that there were scenes that got cut out. They may have been deliberately put there to be cut out.
Hmm.
Other thoughts about the film? I see Linda's got a hand up.
Um, yeah, this isn't about, it's a little bit off of what you were talking about, but one thing confused me. I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed the scenes from New York City,
Yeah.
especially the Diamond area. I've been
Uh-huh.
there many times. But the question I have is, in one of the opening scenes, the father is in the bank. He removes a box, a Band-Aid box. I don't know if
Yeah.
they call him his brother or his father,
Yeah, his
uh,
brother.
his
This is that
brother,
brother. Yeah.
his brother. He removes a Band-Aid box. He walks out of the bank and he hands it to somebody.
Right.
And then that was dropped. Where did that go? What was that about?
So
I didn't understand that.
this is actually what Doc Levy is involved with, what the organization is involved with, right? This sort of shadowy, uh, American espionage organization, maybe worldwide espionage organization, right? They're couriers for the diamonds that Zell took as bribes to uh, release inmates from Auschwitz at the end of World War II, right? So the brother goes into the bank and gets diamonds, then comes out and hands them off to a courier who will presumably um, convert them into money, which is funneled then to Zell in Uruguay, for his living expenses. So that's what's going on in that scene, um, and that Band-Aid box we see now, we don't know for sure that Doc was the courier in New York, but he is the one who receives that Band-Aid box, which he then puts into the bottom of a chocolate box to bring to the antique dealer in Paris, um,
Mm.
who will deal with those diamonds. And so it's kind of a black market in gems that has been, and so the whole mechanism of the plot is set off by accident, right? The question that Laurence Olivier's character keeps asking, is it safe? The answer is yes, it's safe. If someone knew enough to give him the answer was that nobody had stumbled onto his system of couriers and secrets. Uh, it's a random chance that this old Jewish man runs into this old German man in uh, in New York City, and in a case of before I think we even had the words for road rage, gets into a road rage incident and accident with this the character of Zell's brother, right? So his network is safe the whole time. He just doesn't know it, right? And nobody else knows enough to be able to tell him that. So, um,
Can I ask one more question?
sure.
Here was what was confusing to me in the movie. I know that Babe takes Zell into this water treatment place,
Yeah.
and the guy runs out, and he tells him to go, and then there's that whole issue there, and
Uh-huh.
nobody ever comes in.
Yep.
That was what was confusing to me.
Well,
I mean,
that's
I
what.
know, I understand why that had to be done that way,
Yeah.
but it was like, was that part of the zoo or was that the water treatment?
So it's the reservoir in Central Park in New York
Oh,
City,
okay.
right? And that's what happens in a city that goes bankrupt, is you call the police and they don't come, right? The fire department doesn't show up for a fire, right? I mean, not in this movie, but that's what happens to cities in um, you know, so uh we saw it in New York in the 70s. It's in Detroit now, and hopefully it doesn't come to Chicago, the place near us, right? But so this was. I think it's fair to say this was as bad as New York ever gotten. As much as there are people trying to talk about crime in New York today, it's nothing compared to what it was like in the 1970s. The murder rate is 1/4 of what it was in the mid
Mm.
1970s in New York City. So, um, so, um, so in its time, not implausible at all that a guy runs out of there and nobody comes to investigate, right? Some of it is um, the whole syndrome of not wanting to get involved, right, is part of it. But the part that's also just, who are you going to find, right? Yeah. Babs, is that a hand?
Yeah, because I don't know how to find the little yellow thing. What confused me was the role of William Devane. He was a double agent, a triple agent, something like that.
They try to explain it a little bit. He is part of something that is referred to, I think, in this movie only as the organization. It's not the CIA. It's not the FBI. It's the organization that those organizations go to when they don't want to get their hands dirty. So again, I'd say that this is part of that product of 1976, of that feeling of um, what was really going on behind the scenes in our country that we don't know about. It's also, I mean, this is the time period when we're really learning about how the U.S. smuggled Nazis out of Germany deliberately,
Mhm.
that they could use, and they make a point that so they used Zell, who was willing to tell them about where other Nazi war criminals were hiding. So he would, um, so he was an informant for the U.S. government, right? Telling them where to find people that the government wanted to find more than they wanted to find Zell. So William Devane's organization is the one that does the dirty work on behalf of the government, but it can't be traced to anybody in the government.
Mhm.
sort of what Nixon tried to do with his plumbers that obviously didn't work. And so in 1976, I think the audience was primed for that kind of, oh yeah, there's a shadow organization that, lets government people keep their hands clean. That makes sense, right? I think maybe it does make sense, and it may still make sense, right? But, so I wouldn't call this movie far-fetched. Yeah, David.
I wonder if anyone noticed an actor that was in the working at the bank. He had just one line. Who's known for his Dunkin' Donuts commercials
Oh, really?
in the 80s.
Yeah.
Remember those time to make the donuts?
Yeah. Do you
Oh.
know his name? I don't.
His name's Michael Vale. I looked
Okay.
it up.
All right. Thanks. No, I didn't notice. That's a good catch. Yeah, that when you go back and see some of these movies, you sometimes do. You find somebody and say, "Oh, look, it's that guy." Right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, right. There he is in the donuts commercials, right? Yeah, and a few other things that he did. Wow, that's funny. Huh. Great. So, so really, the then I hope you noticed the backgrounds in New York. I forget who mentioned the Diamond District. Was that Linda? Right? Yeah. So, and at the beginning of the movie too, right, is they're racing through the streets. It's I think it's Yom Kippur, right? The only gets mentioned once, but they go by the Park Avenue Synagogue in the 1970s, and you see Jews leaving services. So, um, so there's a little bit of just like a document of the New York Jewish community in the 1970s. This movie too. Well, so Susan, I see you made it. Are you in Arizona? You need to unmute. You need to unmute.
We just got back from taking a beautiful long walk in the sunshine.
Okay, great.
So it's nice. And I'm sorry I came in late, and if anybody has already said this, then please stop me because I don't want to go on if it's been said. But I found the thing that was so unrealistic about this movie is that after being beaten up to a pulp, every time, nobody could possibly go on with the strength that he had after the way, I mean, that's impossible. Nobody can do that. Nobody is superhuman like that. And it wasn't only him, it was anybody and I find this in a lot of movies. And programs that they have these horribly violent fights and then they get up and they can do it again. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I understand that, and I get what you're saying. I mean, I do think it is sort of the convention of all action movies, right? Like you said, that people are stronger than you think is humanly possible.
Exactly.
Um, what we did talk about probably before you got on is we see Dustin Hoffman in training for this marathon all the way through, and that becomes a metaphor, not just for him, but for the Jewish people, right? That we have been running this marathon for centuries, and he has this line that I mentioned that he's trained himself to ignore his pain, right? And I will say that, talking to people who have run marathons, none of them do it without pain, right? You know, they do train themselves to ignore their pain, right? So, adrenaline is a really powerful force, and so I won't make a case for it being realistic because I think that it's only realistic in the world of movies. But the movie does a better job, I thought, than most of explaining how it's possible, right? They even talk about Zell has a line where I think it's Zell who says this about um, strength, inherited strength, right? You know that maybe it wasn't Zell. I'm not sure which character talks about that, but it sort of sets us up for this idea that that Dustin Hoffman and his brother have both been stronger
Mhm,
than one could expect. So
mhm.
so the movie makes a case for it in its own internal logic, I'd say.
Yeah, what it's like to be young.
Yeah, right. I just saw a preview for a movie that's coming out in March, I think, about a guy who doesn't feel pain, which is not the Dustin Hoffman character, but it's an interesting movie concept, right? So, Brenda, is that a hand up? Yeah.
Okay, I have two comments. First off, I guess Dustin Hoffman is a method actor. So in order to portray the Marathon Man, he actually did running. There was a scene where he didn't sleep for several nights. He actually tried to, you know, uh, do this so that he could better portray the person that he was supposed to in the movie.
Right.
That's one comment I wanted to make. The other is the end of the movie was a bit different from the book. I think in the book, the Dustin Hoffman character actually shoots Zell in Central Park, but in the movie, he he tosses the diamonds down, and he said, "Well, you can keep as many diamonds as you can eat."
Yeah.
And I was just wondering whether you thought that was more effective than.
It also says that in the novel, that Babe shoots Zell. In the movie, it's self-inflicted. And again, in the novel, Babe throws the diamonds away and is quietly led away by police. So that is quite a different ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I, I don't, I have not read the book, so I can't comment on it. Um, but I think, some things work on the page, and other things work on screen, right? Um, and um, Despite everything Zell's done, shooting him, it's almost too easy. It's
Uh-huh.
good, right?
Right.
You need the confrontation between the two. You need
Right.
turning of the tables in the sense of,
Hmm. Hmm.
now who's afraid of who in this scene,
Right.
right? And that changes things, and I think that works cinematically. Um,
Hmm.
and of course, just being out in the middle of Central Park is not as evocative a sequence as, having him fall down
Right.
spiral staircase and then over the railing into the water in the city water system, right?
Yeah. I
It's a
mean, Dustin Hoffman never kills him.
Yeah, yeah,
So.
and there we've talked about sometimes, how a house can be a character in a movie. In this movie, as in some others, we've watched New York City as a character in this movie, right?
Mhm.
And so I mean, it begins with Dustin Hoffman running around that reservoir. It ends at the reservoir,
Mhm.
right? So again, it's part of, I think, a really pretty elegant structure that the movie creates
Mhm.
from beginning to end. So, you know, it, and I think having him led away by police doesn't
Mhm.
reflect New York in 1976. I mean, even now, most murders go unsolved,
Mhm.
but particularly in a city that has gone bankrupt, the idea that he would end up arrested seems, uh, you know, it's not in keeping with the character of New York that has been created in the movie, right? So,
Mhm.
so he shoots him and he throws the gun into the reservoir and he's gonna get away with it, you know? right? And that the gun's been shot at those other guys out at the farm. You know, that, right? No one's going to know what happened, and the organization's not going to want anyone to know what happened, right? So I said Julie, and then Nancy.
Like when Dustin Hoffman told him to swallow, he could have as many diamonds as he could swallow, because that was just reflective of what so many Jews did during the Holocaust. They would swallow their gems because it was the only way that they could smuggle them out and keep them.
Right.
And so when he said you can have as many as you can swallow, I thought to myself, touche.
Right. Yeah.
And I
That's
the fact
yeah.
that he was not only stunned that he had to do that, but it was difficult for him to swallow it. It was painful and difficult. He
Uh-huh.
wasn't able to swallow too many.
Right. Right. Yeah. You know, I think uh, that's a great take on that, right? You know, and I think that certainly if it wasn't in the book, you know, and Goldman couldn't imagine it, then maybe it's in maybe he learned something in between writing the book and the screenplay, or maybe this is the influence of the director who might well have known about that idea of how people smuggled their wealth out of Nazi Germany, right? So, um,
The with those diamonds were, he had gotten those diamonds by taking them from Jews who had smuggled them out somehow,
right,
and they used them to buy their freedom.
right,
They smuggled them, and they were useful to the Jews, and he used, and and then he had to swallow them again. Anyhow, I'm not articulating it, but that you get my point.
yeah. No, I would. Perhaps the most unrealistic thing in the whole movie is how many diamonds are in that case, because you know how few Jews got out of Auschwitz, right? You know, so that's you know that I might take it to task a little bit for the exaggeration of how many folks actually got out, right? Nancy?
Yeah, but I don't think it was.
Oh, I was calling on the other Nancy, but that's
Oh,
okay. Which Nancy Frank, why don't you go first, and then we'll get.
I thought that the diamonds were converted from the gold of teeth into diamonds,
Right.
and not
Yeah, the movie says you're
Yes.
right. It starts with gold and then moves into diamonds, right? So
right, but it was
I
the
don't know.
gold from the teeth of Jews.
Right.
Mhm.
So that
So
so
it's really ugly.
yeah. So I think it's both actually, but you know, that he was asking, you know, he starts out asking for gold and taking gold, you know, from dead bodies, right? And but then he starts asking for, you know, whatever wealth he can get. But you're right, gold turned into diamonds, you know, turned back into money, right?
Right. So I never got the diamonds from Jews. I got the gold teeth.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I heard both, but you know,
Okay.
but maybe you might be right. You may have it may just be a line reading that we read a little differently because
Okay.
now that I think about it, it says he started with gold and then moved into diamonds.
And he was a dentist.
Right. So that
And
could mean that
Yes.
he converted all
Right.
the gold to
right.
diamonds. Right.
And you had a dentist as a father, but I really have a fear of dentists. So
Yeah.
this movie really got to me.
Yeah, really activate. So, yeah. Yeah. My dad occasionally had you know, you pull a tooth and it's got a gold filling in it. You know, I mean, he had some leftover gold now and then. You know, it's a weird thing. I mean, I guess technically the gold in somebody's extracted tooth belongs to the person whose tooth is extracted, but nobody ever asked for it, you know?
Mhm.
Well, my dentist always offered it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah. And
Maybe my dad did too. I don't really know, but I know he had a little bit of scrap gold every now and then.
but Right. A lot of people didn't think it was worth anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So.
And it wasn't worth very much in itself, but
Mhm.
put a whole bunch together, it was worth
Right.
a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Nancy, the other Nancy.
Yes. One of the things that struck me when there's a close-up of Zell being made swallow the diamonds, and it made me think of his role as a dentist inflicting pain, and that
Right.
Hoffman knew that this was going to be painful in so many ways for Zell to do, and he
Right.
won't do it, and he doesn't. So I think that works well, and I think the ending works very well. I think if the police had come and taken him away, it would have been like, how do they know about this when the city's being blown up?
Right.
And the other thing is that, there was some French Connection. It's from 1971. It made me think about that because the portrait of New York and then Marseille was pretty brutal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that's enough.
Yeah. Those were, the bad old days in New York compared to what it's like now, for sure. Despite the fact the occasional, healthcare CEO gets murdered in broad daylight in New York City, you know, and the killer rides away on a bicycle. Despite that, in the early 70s to the mid 70s, I mean, people were getting away with murder every day. So,
Um,
um,
are we near the end?
we are.
Okay. I was
Did you
just
have
going to
any
make
more?
a comment that comparing the movie Boys from Brazil to this one is like there's no comparison. This is a well-made movie, and the people are really scary. And in Boys from Brazil, to me it was cringeworthy. It
Yeah.
really was.
Yeah.
The Gregory Peck as the strong Mengele who died, I guess, impoverished in somewhere in Central in South America and all the rest of it. The whole structure. I mean, this is like there's no comparison.
Yeah. But I think I'm gonna try to make a case that they're really two different genres of movie, right?
Yeah.
I talked about The Boys from Brazil and comparing it to movies like Airport and
Yeah, disaster movies.
Inferno and those kinds of things. It's not really about acting. It's not really about realism. It's a completely different kind of genre. So it's interesting to see Olivier function in both of those. Be interesting to know how Olivier and Dustin Hoffman got along. I don't know if
And I didn't read much
that,
about it. Yeah.
because of course Dustin Hoffman, as I think Brenda mentioned, is a method actor, right? And you know, Olivier was trained as a Shakespearean actor. It's a completely different kind of thing. This idea of digging up feeling versus just, analyzing the line and getting the line reading right, isn't it? But Olivier, they're two very effective actors, and in material, they're both amazing. And I think they're really amazing in this movie, and it may actually work to the movie's betterment that Zell's character is deliberately cold, you know, disimpassioned line readings, right? I mean that's what makes that characterization so chilling. If he brought method to it and found some humanity in Zell and brought it to the screen, we wouldn't want to see that, right? So it's actually a fascinating. This movie's fascinating just in watching these two actors I would say at, performing at a high level, right? Like in a completely different way in the same movie. So I would agree with you, Nancy. I think this is the movie. And I'm sure we're on the side of film critics everywhere. And this is the superior movie to that. They do make an interesting comparison.
Yeah, I mean, it's just because we just saw it, and I had my reaction to watching the movie was, ew, that's
Yeah.
really weird. And to watching this one, it's like you could jump the, basically you could, never mind. I'll come up with a word when I think of it.
Okay.
You
I'll
know,
just, compare the fight scene between Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier in
Yeah.
that movie to all the stuff that I think Susan was saying about Dustin Hoffman and doing more than a human could possibly do. There was such an absurdity to that fight in that movie to something that borders on realism in this movie. Right? At least he appeared to be hurt. Yeah, Brenda.
yeah, I'd like to make, if you compare the two movies, it's almost like comparing radio with television.
Yeah.
The Boys from Brazil, you didn't see that much violence, but you could imagine it happening.
Uh-huh.
Whereas Marathon Man was, more visual, like
Yeah.
TV would be. If you would watch Lights Out on the radio, it's pretty scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
So it's all, it's up here. It's what you
Right.
think is going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and like I would say even in this movie, the fear comes not from what you actually see. It comes more from what's said and what you hear, right? You hear the sound of the drill. You don't
The drill. Yeah.
Yeah.
the drill in action. You hear him talking about, how much more painful it is to go into a fresh tooth, not one where the nerve is,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I mean, it's, what he says and what you hear does all the work for your fears.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's filmmaking, and whether or not you like the movie, maybe perhaps you can be appreciative of that element of it. It is master crafts people at work in this movie.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. Do we meet next week, Vanessa?
Oh God, wait.
Our next
Yeah.
date. Our next movie, I believe, is Lenny.
Lenny. Mhm.
Yeah, let's
On the
see.
14th. I just looked at my
So
calendar.
that's a
Thank
week from today, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we get a double dose of Dustin Hoffman at
Okay.
his
You
power.
can go right to mymacomb.org and it is right there. And here we go. So we have Lenny and then Crown Heights.
Right.
So, all righty. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It was really good discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
I
Thanks
agree.
for sticking with us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.